Well, this week I am delving into something quite interesting through the war that not everybody knows about. Still in Scotland, but only just because we're talking about the Shetland Islands, and which is as far north as you can get. In fact, the Shetland Islands are actually closer to Norway than they are to the mainland of Scotland. Piece of information which everybody needed to know. So today I'm talking about the Shetland Bus. The Shetland Bus was the nickname of a clandestine special operations group that made a permanent link between mainland Shetland in Scotland and German-occupied Norway from 1941 until the surrender of Nazi Germany on the 8th of May 1945. So from mid-1942, the group's official name was the Norwegian Naval Independent Unit, or NNIU. And in October 1943, it became an official part of the Royal Norwegian Navy and was renamed the Royal Norwegian Navy Special Unit, or RNNSU. The unit was operated initially by a large number of small fishing boats and later augmented by 3 fast and well-armed submarine chasers, the Vigra, the Hessa, and the Hitra. Crossings were mostly made during the winter under the cover of darkness, and the weather was terrific. I know the North Sea at that time of the year, it's not a nice place. Now, this meant that the crews and passengers had to endure very heavy North Sea conditions, with no lights and a constant risk of discovery by German aircraft or patrol boats, and with the possibility of being captured along the Norwegian coast. Camouflage was the best defence, and the boats were disguised as working fishing boats and the crew themselves as fishermen. Now, the fishing boats were armed with light machine guns, which were concealed inside oil drums placed on the deck. The operation was under constant threat from German forces. Several missions actually went awry, with several fishing boats lost during the early operations. But after receiving the 3 submarine chasers, there were no more losses as such. When Germany launched the invasion of Norway on the 9th of April 1940, French and British troops and ships were sent to help the Norwegians. Several coastal towns were bombed and destroyed by the Germans, and on the 29th of April, HMS Glasgow left the devastated city of Molde with King Haakon VII and Crown Prince Olaf, members of the Norwegian government, and most of the gold from the Norwegian National Bank. In northern Norway, the fighting lasted for another month. A few weeks after the occupation began, the first boats of an armada of fishing vessels and other boats began to arrive in Shetland. Some boats made several journeys across the North Sea carrying refugees. The boats were of many kinds and shapes, but mostly used as the Shetland Bus, were between 50 and 70 feet long, with 2 masts and equipped with a single-cylinder semi-diesel engine, which made this characteristic tonk-tonk sound. And it was actually almost quite a calming sound in a rough sea. In late 1940, both the Secret Intelligence Service and the Special Operations Executive and Norwegian Naval Independent Unit established a base in Lerwick on Shetland, the capital of Shetland Islands. They asked some of the skippers of the boats that were coming over from Norway if they would return to deliver agents and bring others back to Shetland. Well, this went on throughout the winter of 1940 and 41. In early 41, it was decided formally to establish a group of men and boats to assist the SIS and the SOE. Main purpose of the group was to transfer the agents in and out of Norway and provide them with weapons, radios, and other essential supplies. They'd also bring out Norwegians who feared arrest by the Germans. Sometimes the group was involved in special operations, like the failed attack on the German battleship the Tirpitz, and also Operation Anarchy, the raids on Molloy, and Operation Claymore on the Lofoten Islands. My father was there during the war. The men put in charge of organising the group were a British Army officer, Major Leslie Mitchell, and his assistant, Lieutenant David Howarth of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. On their arrival in Shetland, they commandeered Flemington House in Weasdale for their headquarters, and they found a perfect location in Lunaness, north of Lerwick, from which the boats could operate. Before then, the boats had been moored in Catfirth, but Lunaness had a sheltered harbour and a small population that weren't really too curious about what was going on, and the Luna House was then used as accommodation for the boat crews. So while Mitchell stayed in Flemington, Howarth set up his headquarters in Luna House. Their whole staff consisted of 3 British sergeants, Almond, Sherwood and Olsen, and Norman Edwards, a stenographer, Harold Erwitston, a Norwegian cook at Luna, and 2 maids at Flemington. So during the first winter, Flemington House was used to train saboteurs and house agents and to accommodate Norwegian refugees. The lack of a slipway and other repair facilities meant that first the boats had to be repaired at Macalov's in Lerwick, but later they moved the boats and crews to Scalloway, where William Moore and Son had a mechanical workshop and where there was a slipway that was built. Harold Angelveit and John Haraldson were the head mechanics, and Severin Rold became the leader of the carpenters. All ship repairs were done there, but Lunavo was still used for preparing special operations. Dinapore House was the headquarters for the base in Scalloway, while Flemington House became quarters for agents awaiting transport to Norway and for debrief on their return. A former net loft became accommodation for the boat crews and was named Norway House. Flemington House was also on occasion visited by high-ranking officers. Most prominent guest was the Crown Prince Olaf of Norway, who visited in October 1942. Mitchell left the base in Scalloway in December 1942, and Captain Arthur William Sclater, also known as Rogers, became the leader of the operations. At first, there were 14 fishing boats of various sizes. The original Shetland bus boat, the Axel, skippered by August Nervoy, departed from Bergen to Hamnavoe on the west side of Lunaness on the 30th of August 1941. Fishing boats were used at first, but after some losses, it was decided that faster vessels were necessary. So, on the 26th of October 1943, the US Navy officially transferred the submarine chasers Hitra, Vigra, and Hessa to the Shetland Bus Operation. These craft were 110 feet long and capable of a top speed of 22 knots, which is pretty fast. So, when the submarine chasers arrived, the group became an official part of the Royal Norwegian Navy and was renamed the Royal Norwegian Naval Special Unit. So, the boat, the Hitra, was commanded by Ingvald Einsheim, the Vigra was commanded by Leif Larsen, and Hessa was commanded by Petter Salen. They carried out more than 100 tours in Norway with no losses of men or ships. Then on the 9th of May 1945, Vigra, commanded by Larsen, and Hitra by Eidsheim, entered the harbour of Lingøy near Bergen in Free Norway. The group had made 198 trips into Norway in fishing boats and submarine chasers. Leif Larsen completing 52 of them himself, but the Shetland bus had transported 192 agents, 383 tons of weapons and supplies to Norway, and had brought out 73 agents and 373 refugees. 44 members of the group sadly were killed. Notable members in the Shetland bus. Well, the crews of the Shetland bus were men of the coast, fishermen, sailors with detailed local knowledge, which was so important in those waters. Most came over after the occupation, some with their own vessels, others with vessels that were, well, shall we say, stolen with the owner's approval. And they were young men, mostly around about their 20s, some even actually younger. So many of them did several tours in the spring and summer of 1940, evacuating British soldiers who'd been stranded in Norway after the Norwegian campaign and other British citizens living in Norway. Leif Larsen, nicknamed Shetland Larsen, was perhaps the most famous of the Shetland busmen. He became the most highly decorated Allied naval officer of the Second World War. Larsen was born in Bergen in Norway and joined the Norwegian volunteers during the Finnish Winter War, and soon after the war in Finland ended, Norway was invaded by Germany. A Swedish officer, Benkert, set up a company of volunteers who made their way to Norway and fought in eastern Norway until the 8th of June 1940, from then on to the end of the war. Larsen arrived in Shetland with the boat, the MB Motig I, on the 11th of February 1941. So after training with the Company Ling in Scotland, Larsen returned to Lerwick with the St. Magnus on the 19th of August 1941. He did his first Shetland bus tour with the MB Siglaus, skippered by Petter Salen, on the 14th of September in 1941. After the loss of the mine layer Nordsen, where Larsen was second in command, he became a skipper. So there he for he could choose his own crew. So his first boat was the MK Arthur, the boat that he had requisitioned on his escape from Norway after the wrecking of the Nordsen. On the 8th of November 41, Larsen sailed from Shetland on his first tour as skipper. On the return to Shetland, they ran into a storm. One of his crew sadly was blown overboard and drowned. Larsen made several tours with Arthur, but he also skippered other boats as well. In October 1942, he had to scuttle the Arthur in Trondheim Fjord after a failed attempt to attack the German warship, the Tirpitz. He and the crew then escaped to Sweden. So on the 23rd of March 1943, returning from Trena in Nordland with the MK Bergenholm, they were attacked by German aircraft. The boat was sunk, but Larsen and the crew, many of them wounded, rowed for several days until they reached the coast of Norway near Ålesund. After hiding in different places, Larsen and his crew were rescued on the 14th of April by a motor torpedo boat from Lerwick. In October 1943, the new submarine chasers arrived and Larsen became commander of the Vigra with the rank of sub-lieutenant. So in total, he'd made 52 tours to Norway in fishing vessels and in submarine chasers. His awards, well, he was the most highly awarded, decorated member of the Royal Navy officers. And British awards he received were the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal and the Distinguished Service Medal and Bar, and the Distinguished Service Cross, and the Distinguished Service Order. His Norwegian awards included the War Cross with Sword, St. Olaf's Medal, Norwegian War Medal, the Defence Medal of 1940-45. Care Emil Inverser was born in Flattinger, Norway. He was the son of a sea pilot and had joined his father on the pilot boat. When the Germans attacked Norway, he was a fisherman and soon joined the underground army. His activities were discovered by the Germans and he had to leave the country in a hurry. He and 3 other men escaped to Shetland, and in August, that was 1941, with his father's boat, the 42-foot Villa II. From Shetland, he was transferred to England, where he joined and trained with the Company Ling. He was among the men Larsen chose as crew on the MB Arthur and sailed several tours with Larsen. He was crewman on the MB Siglaus and the MB Faye and the MB Harold and the MB Helland. In December 1943, he joined the crew on the submarine chaser the Hesse as engineer under command of Peter Sallen. When Hesse was under repair, Iversen served as engineer on the Vigra and did one tour as a Norwegian Navy motor torpedo boat. When Hesse was back again, rejoined the crew and stayed there until the war ended. Care Iversen did 57 tours across the North Sea, most of them as an engineer. But on the 6th of December 1944, well, he married the Scalloway girl from Shetland, Christine or Sissy Slater. They stayed in Scalloway after the war and had 3 daughters. In 1996, the Shetland Times published Iversen's memoirs, I Was a Shetland Busman, which was reprinted in 2004 with a new introduction and the title of just purely Shetland Busman. The first of the Shetland busmen to lose his life was Nils Ness, aged 23, from Brems on the island of Bomlo, south of Bergen. He was killed on the 28th of October 1941 when German aircraft attacked the Siglaus on its way to Shetland from Norway. Ness was buried at the Luna Kirk churchyard with a Scottish ceremony because there was no Norwegian clergyman to conduct the funeral. His body was moved to his home in Norway in 1948, and a cross marks his grave at Luna. Ness was the second Norwegian buried at the Luna Kirk. The first was an unknown sailor buried on the 5th of February in 1940. He was probably from the cargo ship Hopp, which had left Bergen on the 2nd of February and was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine. The third man was buried on the 9th of June in 1942, and he was sadly found drifting in the sea by a local crofter. John Johnson from Luna, I believe, was the name of the man. The Shetland Norwegian Friendship Society had set up a plaque on the church wall outside to remembrance of these 2 unknown men. British naval officer and historian and author David Howarth requested that his ashes be scattered over the water at Luna Voe. A memorial plaque is mounted on the churchyard wall at Luna Kirk to this effect. Well, the Shetland Bus Memorial is located at Scalloway, and the local museum has a permanent exhibition relating to the activities of the Shetland Bus. These were extraordinary men in extraordinary times, and navigating that horrific sea in winter in a small fishing boat with the engine going tunk and tunk and tunk, well, that was an incredible job and feat of bravery in itself. And of course, no lights, not even navigation lights, so you couldn't be detected by the enemy. Brave men, every one of them. But this week, an area which I'm very, very fond of, an area I lived in for about 30, 35 years, and that's the area around the west of Lochaber. And if you got a map of Scotland and go up the west coast to about exactly the halfway point, then you are pretty much in the area. So today I'm talking about the covert side of World War II and Special Operations Executive, or SOE it was known, which was based in that very area where I lived. I'll hasten to add, not at the same time. So this is really about the art of ungentlemanly warfare. And Arisaig House, as you see in the photograph there, it lies about 2 miles southeast of the village of Arisaig in Lochaber. And it's located on the road to the Isles, which is a historic route which connects the town of Fort William to the port of Mallig in the beautiful West Highlands of Scotland. By its location, the area of West Lochaber is relatively isolated and lightly populated, and I can verify that because it would cost me, it would cost me 10 litres of petrol to go and buy 5 litres of petrol. So it's a long way from the nearest bank, supermarket or petrol station. And during World War II, Arisaig House, along with 8 other large houses and hunting lodges in the area, were requisitioned for use by the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, and became a no-go area. The SOE established its first training base at Inverailort Castle, which is, or Inverailort House as it's sometimes referred to, which is in the photograph just now, and then later transferred its headquarters to Arisaig House itself. And Inverailort became a Commando training school in the art of ungentlemanly warfare. Arisaig House became an SOE special training school, designated as STS-21. It functioned as a finishing school and specialised in commando skills, providing the final stage of training for agents destined to serve in the field. Many other local buildings were requisitioned for use by SOE to accommodate and train the men and women preparing to serve as undercover agents. The area around Arisaig was critical to the preliminary training of some 3,000 special agents, and with only one access road, it was actually easy to seal off as a special protected area and keep it secure from unwanted attention. And although it had the advantage of remoteness and distance to keep prying eyes away, it was also convenient for legitimate visitors to reach, as it was served by a railway line. So security was rigorously maintained, and even the locals there were required to have special passes for movement into and out of the protected area. So from May 1940, the War Office started the process of requisitioning properties in the Scottish Highlands for unspecified military purposes, one of which was Inverailort House, which was the home of the Cameron Head family. And I remember old Mrs. Cameron Head very, very well. Very eccentric character, a wonderful, wonderful lady. So situated close to the shores of Lochaber and on the foothills of Shuncruach and Unstack, Inverailort House had been identified as the ideal location for an irregular warfare school. So under the stewardship of military intelligence or research, Brian Mayfield and Bill Sterling, who was the elder brother of David Sterling, who formed the Special Air Services, or SAS, which is the British Army's elite Special Forces regiment, and had been appointed as commanding officer and chief instructor, respectively, of what had been designated as the Special Training Centre, or STC, Lochaber. Mayfield and Sterling's first jobs were to recruit instructors suitably qualified in the teaching of the black arts associated with guerrilla warfare. Shimmy Lovett, the Lord Lovett, who was my godfather, who was Sterling's cousin, was an obvious choice. Recently departed from his father's old regiment, the Lovett Scouts, he was looking to utilise his skills as a sniper and a stalker and expert of fieldcraft in rugged and inhospitable terrains. A wide array of instructors had been recruited and were soon passing on the benefits of their experience, either military or otherwise, including Jim Gavin of the Royal Engineers, who was a Himalayan climber, and he was part of the 8-man climbing team on the Everest expedition of 1936. Other adventurers included no less than 5 holders of the prestigious Polar Medal: Jimmy Scott, who along with fellow recipient Freddie Spencer Chapman, were members of Gino Watkins' British Arctic air route expedition to Greenland in 1930 and 31. Then there was Martin Lindsay, who had been on the Greenland expedition and on the British Trans-Greenland expedition of 1934, with fellow instructor and Polar Medal holder Andrew Croft. The 5th holder of the medal, and perhaps the most distinguished, was Surgeon Commander Murray Levick, who had been on the ill-fated Terra Nova expedition to the South Pole with Captain Scott in 1910-13. The list of other instructors reporting to the STC Inverailort reads like a who's who of adventurers and mavericks, interlaced with explosives experts, weapons instructors, survival specialists, and burglars. Well, Sir Tommy McPherson, who attended the first Commando course, recalled in his words, "There was a remarkable collection of instructors there. There was a fellow called Mackworth Preed, an ex-guardsman, who was a weaponry instructor, and he had to be the finest shot I've ever seen. With a .303 standard bolt-action rifle, he could get 3 magazines off in a minute, and they'd all be in one or beside the bullseye at 300 yards. He was a remarkable chap. He used his 3rd finger on the trigger and flicked the bolt, which had very easy action, with his 2nd finger after each shot, and the speed was astonishing. We had a very good explosive chap and a gentleman on release from Peterhead Jail, who was an expert safe man, and a very nice chap he was too." Then we go on. The famous actor David Niven was trained in explosives at Inverailort House, becoming an extremely adept at blowing up trains and other targets. And as well as having a starring role in the movie The Guns of Navarone, David was also the technical explosives advisor to the movie. He was heard to say, "Well, at least something I learned in my army training came into useful in peacetime." The inaccessibility of the location and harshness of the environment made it a perfect training area for the fledgling commando officers, many of whom had only spent a few weeks with their men before being sent on to the Highlands. Survival and fieldcraft training were the remit of Lord Lovett and his fieldcraft team, who used local gillies and non-commissioned officers from the Lovett Scouts to assist with instruction and demonstrations. Lessons and exercises were carried out in the rugged terrain around Lochailart, and believe me, it is rugged there as well. I mean, the hills are just vertical. These hills were home ground to myself for many years, and I know just how difficult and unforgiving they can be, with the weather changing from good to horrendous in seconds. And I've been caught out in them before, and it gets really bad there. So hours were spent learning how to patrol using the ground and natural features to their advantage, while being taught the principles of camouflage and concealment. Stalking was taught day and night, and they were taught how to kill, skin, gut, and cook deer, sheep, and rabbits. They were encouraged to use boats in the sea loch to supplement their rations with fresh mackerel and sea trout. Live firing was commonplace. Mad Mike Calvert from the Royal Engineers assisted Jim Galvin with the fundamentals of explosive devices, booby traps, and all the associated components required for demolition and sabotage. It's not unusual, even to this day, to come across a few rounds of live ammunition partly hidden amongst the rocks and boulders on the mountainsides. It was just, the noise on those hills must have been something else in those days. So, as with all commando training, physical fitness was one of the key components. The mountainous terrain and inclement weather turned a standard route march into a real feat of endurance. John Murray of No. 2 Commando recalls the experience, and in his words, he said, We underwent some pretty hair-raising and tough training in or around Lochailart. I remember marching from Fort William to Lochailart on an unmade road. It was no joke, despite the fact that we were all reasonably fit. I also remember being in the tender care of Captains Fairbairn and Sykes for unarmed combat. Well, I should mention here that the march from Fort William to Lochailart, it's about 35 miles in distance. And just imagine doing that in all weathers, carrying about 50 pounds of kit on your back and another 8.5-pound rifle as well. It's quite a feat, it really is. And with both feet, there'd be a lot of blisters. If assault courses and physical training exercises were the norm, the Fairbairn and Sykes brand of PT wasn't. They taught them to fight with knives, sticks, shovels, toshes, tin hats, anything they could get their hands on. How to smash eardrums, rip mouths, split cheeks and gouge eyes, and for good measure how to break necks as well, dislocate shoulders and crush sternums. It was tough stuff. Training designed to teach them how to kill a man with their bare hands, and how, in Fairbairn's words, were to get tough. At the end of the war, there was a meeting with Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower, along with a senior British intelligence officer, in the drawing room of Inverailort House. Now, this meeting was a top-secret discussion which actually set the groundwork on the forming of America's Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was born there. Sadly, Inverailort House today, it's in a state of decay, and it's almost beyond repair. I saw it just recently, and it's so sad looking at it now. Until 2014, one of the rooms in the house actually served as the local post office to Lochailart. I have many fond memories from my frequent visits to Inverailort House, or Castle, as it was also known. In the hallway, old magazines and newspapers were piled up on a large table, and they were left as they were in 1945 by the military occupants. Officers' names are still to this day inscribed in gold leaf on several of the doors on the first floor. A clear-out in 1995 uncovered numerous boxes and army kit bags under the tables, some of which contained radio equipment and other military paraphernalia. And there was one box of live Mills 36 hand grenades discovered behind a couch in one of the other rooms. An incredible time warp of military history dating back to the war years. And I've even enjoyed the nostalgia of a number of true traditional Highland balls there, with everyone in their finery and dancing to reels and jigs accompanied by local pipers. Much whiskey was enjoyed, and it would go on all night and even into the next day. Arisaig House, the former SOE headquarters, was until 2020 Aurelian Chateau 5-star country house hotel, where I have enjoyed many a meal of superb quality food. It's now reverted to a grand private country house with an incredible history, and not without a certain amount of mystery.